Hey Gavin, what's your favorite thing about your dad?
My favorite thing is that he's really nice, and he lets me play video games when I want to.
Annabelle, what does your dad do for work?
He does something to do with solar panels.
Anything else?
I don't know.
All right, Nathan. Question for you. What do you wish your dad did more of with you?
I wish he swam more with me.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the BizDad podcast. Today, I am actually very excited to talk to Josh Notes. He and I have been working together for the last couple of years on a couple different ventures, and I'm looking forward to diving into a little bit of how he looks at being a dad, how he runs his business operations. He also has a son who loves golf, and it's going to be a great time to chat about some of this stuff. And I'm going to steal as many ideas as I can, which is kind of the whole purpose of this, is for everybody to be able to steal as many ideas as they can from good dads. But Josh, if you can, please tell us all a little bit about who you are, who your family is, and what your business is.
All right. Thank you for having me and all the listeners out there. So Josh Notes, family is myself and my wife, Jen, are leaders of our family here. And we've got Nathan, age 10, Annabelle, age 8, and Gavin's going to turn 6 here in just a couple months. So, and I got a dog named Wally.
The old dog named Wally. You can't leave Wally out.
Yeah, can't leave Wally out.
That's not on my notes. Okay.
And then on the business side, serial entrepreneur. I'm sure we'll get into other ventures, but right now my main focus is sustain CFO, provide fractional CFO services to small, medium, growing businesses. And then I have a collective of energy businesses, EFW, Energy, Food, and Water. The Energy Artisans is kind of our guild. And we develop clean energy assets in the Mid-Atlantic of the United States.
Awesome. All right. I knew a little bit about that, but I'm going to have to ask a few more questions because I don't know a ton about that. That's going to be interesting. So before we dive too much into all of that stuff, tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up, who your dad was, what it was like having him as a father. Just kind of dive into that a little bit.
Great. Okay, so born into an entrepreneurial family. It wasn't ever expressed that way, but looking back on it, it's like, oh, no wonder how I ended up here. So I was born in the foothills of San Francisco in a small little mountain town called Boulder Creek. My mom and dad, I'm going to call them hippies. I don't think they will be upset about hearing that. My dad was kind of late to the hippie party. He was born in 1942. My mom was born in 1950. So they met in a hot tub. And got married about 5 days later. So That's about as hippie as it gets, right?
Yeah.
And growing up, it was my mom was, and she pretty much went down as one of the longest serving midwives, certified nurse midwives in the Maryland area. And my dad was an entrepreneur who kind of jumped in and out of business ventures and starting his own thing, and then he would go and work for the government for a period of time, and then kind of cycle back through. But I had a lot of freedom growing up. We moved to the East Coast because of business failure and some politics in the midwifery world when I was about 5. So really grew up here in between Baltimore and DC. Have an older brother, Zach, and we just had a ton of freedom to try things out, including starting businesses. I'm sure we'll get into that, but yeah.
That's awesome. So you mentioned your dad do a business and go into government, do a business. What was kind of that back and forth? How did that work, and what was your view from a young age on what that meant to you guys?
I don't know if I really recognized it probably until I was about 8. Before that, he had some software ventures. He's so early in the computer game that they just called it math. But he was using early stage computing in government and was having some pretty cool wins. But unfortunately for the family wealth, it was all in the name of government. So as an example of that, he created what's called the postman's algorithm. And so what that did was it revamped the entire postal service to make it more efficient. And what he figured out was that taking right turns would cut about 25% of the driving out of the routes of the postal service. So cool story, saved $10 billion for the government annually in the 1960s and went on to do a bunch of other things in defense. But the business he started in California was kind of like a Microsoft Visio. So it was kind of like building blocks of code that you could build software applications on. He was early, as he kind of has been with each of his ventures, and he pretty well sucked at marketing. And so that's why these businesses usually tended not to work. And, then money would get tight. And my mom didn't make a ton of money because she was serving the kind of undocumented population of women up and down the California coast and delivering babies and, collecting what she could. But things were tight, but I never felt like scared about money. But it was also like, hey, if you want some money, go out there and work for it. So once we came to the East Coast, it started snowing. I remember first early ventures were like shoveling, raking leaves, like all those early neighborhood ventures.
Awesome. Yeah, those are the same ones that I did growing up, at least at those types of ages, junior high and whatnot, in upstate New York. It was like, yeah, that's what you do. You rake leaves, prepare for the snow, and then you go shovel, and you go bouncing house to house to house, and you go shovel. So, it's funny. I never really looked at those as entrepreneurial things until I started being an entrepreneur and was like, well, yeah, of course, like that makes total sense. I went out and was trying to work my butt off for myself to be able to earn money, to be able to do what I wanted. And, but I joined the military right out of high school. So it was one of those, like, had I realized what I was doing, maybe I wouldn't have, but I'm happy the way my life turned out, so I can't complain too awfully much. But, when you were growing up and you were saying, hey, you were exposed to like the entrepreneurial stuff, you started doing some of that yourself. How did that go through high school and then to, into college? How did your progression into entrepreneurship and being a serial entrepreneur kind of meld?
So the first thing, that I kind of reflect on is just that it was never, there was never like a, you need to, I mean, I was told like, you're going to go to college, you're getting good grades, like you're going to go to college, we'll figure it out. Like finances was something we had to figure out, but, it wasn't, you're going to go to college and then you're going to get a job. It was, you're going to go to college, figure out, some specialty, and then you'll figure out how to use that in the world. And so I think it wasn't a push towards entrepreneurship, but it was an open door. And it allowed for a lot of exploration. And at a young age, when, started kind of experimenting in it, even I got into some trouble we'll talk about. It's kind of fun trouble to talk about. But my parents weren't like, you're bad. They were like, okay, what'd you learn? Like, what are you going to do next time different? Okay, so like the first one that really, so my brother and I were starting these landscaping related businesses. And we got into a fight, like a fist fight over, who was going to shovel. I think it was raking leaves. Who's going to rake like the last portion of the leaves? And anyway, the client kind of came out, was like, I'm not paying you, get out of my yard. We're like bleeding all over the yard. And so, my mom, we came back home. We were kind of still yelling about it. And she was just like, okay, like, she didn't like take her rakes away or anything like that. But I do remember when we left the house, it was maybe a year or two later, to go do snow shoveling. We didn't shovel their walkway first. And she was pissed she was not happy because we took her shovels, her cost of goods, and we didn't perform for the material supplier. And so she ended up shoveling it like with this like old broken one and like hurt her wrist. And I remember like that was the first time when I was like, okay, like I need to respect my supply chain. Kind of accelerate forward into middle school. That's had a really good friend named Matej. He was the foreign kid from Slovakia, and he didn't speak much English, but he was a year older just because of the way the school year lined up with his birthday. So he got a job at Dunkin' Donuts, and they had a new policy that you weren't allowed to give away the donuts. You had to throw them away because some homeless person had gotten sick from eating donuts out of a trash can or something. So he starts bringing these donuts like by the box. And, first he's like at our lunch table and like we're all buying from him. And there's this line kind of forming. And on like week 2, he's kind of getting out of hand. Line's getting really long. And I'm like, hey, dude, do you need any help? And he's like, yeah, man, like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm out of locker space. I'm like, well, I don't really use my locker. Like, you can use my locker. And I was like, I think you could get more people through the line if I pre-collected the order and the money. and then you just serve them and keep them happy and get the order for tomorrow. And he was like, dude, that's great. So we like doubled revenue. We ended up having to like alter the way that the line flowed for, the regular lunch line. And we ended up bringing on this other guy. He was like the kid who went through puberty first, and he was like our security. His name was Brian. I won't give up his last name because he's listening, but he taught us a really interesting lesson about company culture and about how you treat your customers in HR, because the line got real long, and the principals were kind of allowing this to happen. But then one day the vice principal, Miss McGowan, I hope she is listening, she came and she asked for a bear claw, like up in the front of line. And Brian told her, you need to get in line with everybody else. And that was the last day we were in that business. We all got pulled down to the office, got our moms called. We had made like all this money in quarters, hundreds of dollars. And the funny thing was, which it kind of reflects back on like values, is I didn't even care about the money. It was just fun. It was fun to hustle. It was fun to try to problem solve on the fly. And I think that's carried forward into, kind of everything I've done since.
That's hilarious.
I got more, but let me know if there's any other questions.
No, that's great. I even wrote down double donut revenue. Like that's that's solid, right? Already looking at what's our revenue, what's our cost of goods sold, what's I love how you're even implementing into even how you're talking about it, like real world business stuff from shoveling, right? I had to respect my supply chain, right? That's hilarious. And this is sounding like an episode that we could easily just play for kids and be like, hey, are you hearing how this is done? Respect your supply. You better rake my lawn first. All right. I'll buy the rakes, rake my lawn first, then go out. But this is awesome. So after figuring out how to double donut revenue and then getting that shut down by the man, or the woe man in this particular case, right? Where did you move on to, and when you went into college, like what did you study in college, and what did I'm assuming you were, of course, continuing to hustle some way, shape, or form when you were in college as well.
Absolutely. So we'll say kind of senior year. Okay, so let's bring golf into the picture. So okay. I was competitive athlete. Really, thought I was going to be a professional something player. Basketball, then it was baseball. Baseball got kind of worn out because had this coach who didn't want to pitch me anymore because he pitched his son and whatever, politics on baseball. But so I switched all my energy to golf at 13. And in the story of things, I'd kind of gotten into some trouble in the neighborhood, not around business, skateboarding, staying out late, doing things I wasn't supposed to be doing. And, my parents had enough teaching in me of values that I was self-aware that I was making mistakes. Like while it was going on, and I was like kind of looking for an out, without losing my street cred at 13, right? All that street cred you
all
developed
the street cred at 13. Yes, of course.
So, I was going through my bar mitzvah year. And so I was like interacting with this rabbi once a week and like learning how to sing songs in a language I didn't speak while my voice was cracking because of puberty. And it was making me reflect and think about this a lot. And anyways, at the end of this, bar mitzvah period, there's some money that comes in. My parents took the money and they're like, you get, it was like 3% of it. And they expressed it in a percentage. And they're like, what do you want to do with this? But it has to be an investment in yourself. And I bought myself a set of golf clubs. I just gotten into the game and I got hooked, like super obsessed, took all that energy of being a really good, travel baseball player, put it into golf, got to scratch within 3 years. And then I was going to be a professional golfer. That was the game plan. A couple injuries occurred because I also was a wrestler. And probably by senior year, it was kind of like this, all right, I'm not going to probably go to college on this. What am I going to do? And so when I was filling out applications, went to some reach schools, went to some ones I thought I would play golf at, and ended up going to the University of Maryland. And I don't really remember why I selected business school in the application. It wasn't like I had this feeling that I was actually an entrepreneur or all these stories I'm telling you that wasn't self-realized at the time. But apparently back then, that's all you had to do to get in the Smith School of Business, which now is like a top 10 school of business. I had high enough SATs and I checked this box. So day one, I'm, here you go. I'm like, you're going to the business school. It doesn't work that way anymore. Like you have to go to a year of prereqs before you get in. But with that in mind, my brother was 3 years older than me, and he was an engineer, and he was kind of getting interested. The year is 2002, So real estate was starting to really heat up. And so he had found out with some friends and gotten interested in tax liens. And so he was like, hey, we're putting money in on some tax liens in Baltimore City. And I'm like, that sounds cool. That sounds like a fun hustle. Let's do it. So he did the first year with him and another buddy. They got one tax lien. It redeemed. They got their money back with a little bit of interest. And then the next year he goes, okay, let's take this thing to the next level. So this was my senior year in high school. I ended up raising $100,000 from people that I caddied for. And we went out and deployed it into like the troublesome neighborhoods in Baltimore City. This is like when the wire is airing. Yeah. And it ended up becoming basically a 7-year internship because I never made any money. We got about 65% of the money back to the investors, but I ended up acquiring over a couple hundred liens. We ended up with 30 properties. And then I had to sell all these things. And what happened, of course, is the market dynamics changed. Real estate crashed. All these houses that were being sold on spec with, people getting their 4th and 5th house, all that credit collapsed. And I ended up having to move this property, like just pure grit. I mean, I'm talking, going construction van to construction van, putting tarps up on the house with the price and my phone number. I still get calls sometimes wherever these tarps are. Like, yo, you got that house down on Luzerne, man. I'm trying to buy that for my family. I'm like, that thing's been sold for a while, but I guess nobody took the tarp down. So it was this really kind of like street level MBA that I earned in a pretty dangerous environment that I also didn't really fully recognize. And I think we talk a lot these days about the urban environment and decay and whatnot. And Baltimore sure had that. But it also had this kind of checkerboard feel where you'd be in this nice neighborhood that was, designed in the 1800s and was, had these really cool facades and everything was on the up and up. And you go 2 blocks down and 80% vacancy and open drug use and, infrastructure, popping out of the streets. And so it was a very eye-opening experience about kind of the haves and the have-nots. And it's only 15 miles from my house, which is this great suburban environment. So that was the one that kind of really gave me the foundation of what's it like to be in business and how do you really have to work and investor relations and all these other, bullets that you and I have talked about in our other world and other life.
So your senior year, you're finally learning about tax liens. You jump into business school, and then you go and get your street business as well. How much were you able to kind of align the two of those things up together? What you were learning in school versus what you were learning on the street? Because it seems to be that when I talk to a lot of folks who are getting their MBAs and all this stuff, like none of their professors have ever run a business. They just know how to teach this like MBA stuff. And it's like, I don't understand how we're learning from people who've never ran a business, how to run a business. But, but the fact that you're learning on the ground, like what were you able to apply in school, and in school, what were you able to apply learning on the ground?
So I think it made the classwork more fun because I just made everything related to this one little business that I was doing. I had another one that I was working on with my dad at the same time around basically taking AI and using it to do algorithmic trading of the financial markets. So I had this like really street related and then this, very cerebral version that I was like bouncing back and forth between. But to your point about business school, I mean, if we're being honest, and University of Maryland has been good to me as an alma mater, but when I look back at the business school environment, it's really a pipeline to become, somebody in the corporate, field, right? And they want people to become investment bankers. That's kind of the dream they sell you on. That everybody mostly falls short of that, and you end up somewhere in some mid-level position in some corporation. But there was actually very few entrepreneurs in my classes, or there was little talk about that. But what I noticed was, I would answer. I would answer the questions, and I would join the groups and whatnot. Like I didn't slack off in school, but I didn't get the greatest grade, maybe 3.3, 3.4. But I felt like my energy was appreciated both by the teammates and the professors, because like you said, nobody else was actually doing anything in business. They might have an internship at Deloitte or something, but they're like, I don't know, I just sit in this office room and wait till they tell me to file stuff. And I'm like, dude, check out what I saw. Check out this rat on the streets of Baltimore City. It's bigger than the tires. And the professors, like there was a couple times where I got behind on a subject, would be some advanced Excel modeling thing. And I'm like, I wrote like a note like, hey, I didn't get to this. And here's why. But here's what I learned, and I think it's the lesson you're trying to get. I didn't reverse engineer the Black and Scholes model on Home Depot, but I did go to Home Depot and buy all this stuff with a credit card. And here's what I got stuck on this plumbing issue. And they were like, you know what, I'm gonna give you a B and like keep doing what you're doing, kid, because this is good stuff.
That's awesome.
So this was kind of the bounce back all the way to senior year. And I went and I did a job interview at like a tech firm in Tyson's Corner at the intersection of kind of operations and tech. And it was like November, my senior year. And I'm not exactly sure why I was there. Maybe it was kind of to like, so I could tell my girlfriend's parents that I was like interviewing for jobs. And I get this interview, it goes pretty well. And at the end of it, the guy's like, listen, he's like, I want to give you this job, but I don't want you to take it until you run through all this entrepreneurial stuff. And if you come out the other side, you still need a job, come back and find me. I'll give you a job. But you're an entrepreneur. You need to remain in that lane because there's not enough of you and there's plenty of people who can do this job. And that was kind of a, okay. Like, all right.
Tell me more about that conversation. What did you take from that? What it like? Was that literally all of the conversation, or what else was had on that?
I mean, there was a professor that I was working with who was an entrepreneur. This German guy, Oliver Schlocke, awesome guy. He was one of the mentors in kind of the actual college of the professors that I interacted with. This guy was like cheering me on. He would meet with me after hours, and I would talk to him about what I was doing. He'd talk to me about market segmentation, go to market, and all these kind of concepts that they never dove into enough. And so I kind of had that. And then I had, this pressure because I was caddying. So I was interacting with a lot of very wealthy people who all had these established companies. And they would ask, well, what are you going to do? Because I was the caddy champ, and they're kind of like rooting for me, like, hey, what are you going to do next year? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm going to go get this, I'm looking at a couple job opportunities. Well, you come work for me and but went to this interview and like, I guess I didn't really know what I wanted. And coming out the other end of it, like kind of forced me to look in the mirror and be like, wait a minute, like you can have whatever you want, but you have to decide. It was very much this kind of, fork in the road opportunity. And I had just enough time, 6 more months left to kind of take a running start at what ended up kind of becoming my first venture that actually paid me something. So I had enough going at the end so I didn't have to feel like I'm just taking a full leap of faith.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm super happy to hear that guy said that to you, because that makes a huge difference in knowing that was an option out there, is to like, hey, like you've got the job if you want it, but you really don't want this job. Like that's a great thing to hear. Probably uncomfortable at the moment. Like, were you uncomfortable hearing that, or was it like once you heard it, you were like, yeah, this dude's totally right? Like, how did your brain kind of process that?
So I think that it felt like a kind of a free option hanging out in the back pocket. And I've always been really open with my family, my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, Jen. And although, my wife has taken more of this corporate track, she was very supportive of me taking risk. And so I think all I needed was to just run this by her, run it by my parents. And they're like, yeah, you can hang out. Yeah, you can keep living here. Like
nice.
My mom was like, number one, you have to keep healthcare. That was her number one rule. And so I actually went out and like campaigned for like Obama to get healthcare, because I was like, if I have healthcare, then I know I'm allowed to stay an entrepreneur. And that was like the scariest thing, was actually having to go get a job, like in my head. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I joined the military right out of high school, had no idea that there were any other options. I didn't have anybody telling me anything. I didn't even know necessarily college was an option. Not that I didn't know it was an option, because I had friends who were going. So that's silly to say that I didn't know it was an option. But it was like I literally signed up for the Air Force at 16 years old. So I was in delayed enlistment until I was able to leave. I graduated high school and then left the month after. So it was like that was the option, like the option, because there was only one. Like it was just, this is where you go. So it took me a while of kind of going from job to job to job to job. Like even inside the military, I switched multiple jobs and it was tough before I realized, but I need something different. And then I started going down this route with ADPI and, buying apartment buildings and doing all this stuff. And I was like, wow, this is something I really enjoy. And then it made it so much easier for me to just jump ship from the military, because I did that same thing, that you did with Jen. As I talked to my wife, I said, Raquel, what, like, I can't keep doing this anymore, right? I don't get to see my kids enough. I don't get to see you enough. I don't enjoy doing what I'm doing anymore. It turned into a lot of political garbage that I didn't want to deal with anymore. Like I wanted to go and do the mission, and that was it. And then we weren't allowed to barely do that anymore. So it's like I can't keep doing this when I know I have all these other options out there. I wish that somebody would have told me at 22 years old, 21, 22 years old, like, dude, you can easily get a job. Jobs are a dime a dozen. Go do this thing. Chase this thing. You've got drive in you in a different way. From that conversation you had, I'm selfishly asking this question because I want to talk to my kids about this. How do you perceive the conversation's going to be, or already going, with your kids when it comes time to going down that route? Maybe it's because you saw something in them. Maybe it's just because you want the options open. Whatever it is, how do you perceive those the conversations you had affecting how you now have conversations with your kids?
That's deep. I'm already having the conversation with my two older ones, but I don't present it. And I got to be careful with this because, mom is working a job and has to do what they say and has been a breadwinner and the, support mechanism. And I got to be careful not to demonize that.
Yeah.
Because for some people, that is a better route. Like that is the route, depending on where your stomach lands on your risk profile and what your needs and wants are and where those intersect. Like starting a business is, let's be honest, it's scary, it's risky, it's not a sure bet at all. It is sold as a lot more confetti and high fives than it actually is. So I really try to frame this out for my children in the perspective of time. Right, our most valuable resource, and just helping them to understand, through looking at my calendar and like showing them that, look, like, although I don't have to answer to any one of my business partners, actually, I might have made this harder. I got to answer to all these clients because I have a fractional business. So mom has, a set of investing partners that are her bosses. I have all these clients I have to keep happy. And the only way for me to do that is to be very regimented in structuring my time, both personal and business. The difference is when something comes up, I don't really have to ask permission. I just have to, as long as I can tell myself that this works. So I actually write in my journal, I'm going to read this to you, that we must teach our children to share their stoic stories with autonomy, mastery, purpose, and extraordinary discipline. And I think that is what I'm trying to accomplish every day with my kids, is that if I can teach them how to tell themselves their own story and do it in a positive way that includes those aspects of it, they're going to be able to figure it out. And, business is just a vehicle to do that. Sports is a vehicle to do that. Looking at what mom and dad do as far as jobs and housework and that is a way to look at it as well. But I don't think there's a right or wrong path. I think there's just, about continuing to check in with yourself and ask yourself questions and, do things like journaling. I've got the older two, one more interested than the other, but they both do it daily. And I think that starts to allow you to have these conversations with yourself that allow you to feel your way through this kind of, unsure period that both of us are talking about. I want to go backwards for one moment to tell you how we almost went on the same path. So I was a senior in high school in 2001. My grandfather was in the military, but military wasn't anything that was really presented to me as an option. But 9/11 happens, and I felt this surge of patriotism. And our school was an ROTC school, Air Force ROTC, and I signed up the next day. And on 9/12/2001, I signed up to be in the Air Force, but I didn't have to do anything about it. Right. I just went, finished out high school, went to college, University of Maryland. I was actually supposed to pay for my college. That was my plan through this scholarship. And I went into the first class. It was a little bit delayed. Like it was like a week or two after school started. So I had already started like partying and doing fun stuff. And, I walk in this room at 7 a.m. I'm like feeling whatever from the night before. And everybody's, hoo-ah. And they all seemed like they understood the system they were in. And I was like, where am I? What is going on? And, I had been reading a lot about what was going on in the wars that were starting. and I was having like political questions in my own head about like, is this something I support? I don't support. And so anyways, I made it through half of one class. They gave you a break. I called my mom and I was like, Mom, and like, it could have been literally, a hangover that caused me to make this phone call. I was just like, I don't really want to be here. Like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why I signed up for this. And she's like, well, have you read the contract? Like, what happens if you leave? And I'm like, nothing. Like, I got like, some period of days and then I don't owe anything back. It's just I dropped the credits. She's like, run. Go home and go back to sleep. And we'll talk about this tomorrow. And I'm like, well, what about paying for college? She's like, we'll figure it out. But me and your father didn't actually want you to join the military. So we didn't tell you that, but like, we're telling you now. And I'm like, okay. So I, went and had a hangover nap and I woke up and I wasn't in the military anymore. But like, that's a different path that it could have went down.
No joke. Yeah.
Anyways.
Obviously, there had to be some, you even implied some critical thinking on how you were going about that. Like, were you always like a critical thinker on that type of level? Like when you went into a situation to kind of really understand what it was? Like, as I'm asking, because like I was oftentimes, again, I didn't even know there were other options other than that. My mom was in the military. My dad was in the military. My grandparents were in the military. Like, that's just what LeBars did, apparently. And so that's what I'm going to do. So I didn't critically think through all of that. I was super smart when I was in like junior high. I got a social life and was no longer super smart. I was probably still super smart, just didn't apply it at all. So I didn't have that critical thinking at all. But you, right at 19 years old, 18 years old, jumping right out of high school, were already critically thinking about, okay, well, I'm in a scenario. I'm not sure what I think about it. This is what's going on. Was that something you always had? And has that been like a part of your entrepreneur path? Because it feels like it would be. It's an assumption.
So, all right, I'm going to try to answer that in two ways. One is I had a lot of access. My parents were the tell your kids the truth parents. Okay, I mentioned already being bar mitzvahed. There's a thing there about being the only Jewish kid where, like, for anybody who's listening, well, I'm not going to get into that in case there's any kids listening too young, but there was a very specific truth that I was like, okay. And my mom was like, you don't tell anyone else that. Like, what happens at the end of the year, right? And where people are present. So I'm like, I had that like burden of that growing up, which I don't know if that created perspective, but the other thing was they read the newspaper every day, Washington Post on table. My dad read that thing like end to end. And he would like ask me questions. And like McNeil Lair was on TV. And like, I remember so I ended up, long story short, I ended up interacting with a couple of my elementary school teachers as an adult, as an entrepreneur. And I asked them, like, what do you remember about me? And they're like, you were just like this really aware kid. I'm like, can you give me an example? And so the teacher said it was like first grade. And we had just had like the first Persian Gulf War had started. And, kids are talking about like, they brought it up in class because some parents of kids, they wanted to make sure that there was a safe space and kids could talk about it and say, does anybody have any questions? And I raised my hand. I'm like, who's going to rebuild all of the houses that I saw getting knocked over by these bombs? They're like, yeah, I don't know. We'll talk about that afterwards. Let's move along. Yeah. And then I had this other teacher. So I was a, gifted and talented student up until middle school, kind of similar to you. I was in this Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth. I had a lot of, proud moments that I remember around academics. I was on like the math competition team. But what happened was, with no technology, I outstripped the resources of my elementary school. And I actually got, first grade, I was in regular math. I moved up to gifted and talented math in second grade. And by like the third quarter, I had moved through second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade math. And they're like, we don't have any more. I was like in the middle of the pod with a textbook. And they're just like, go to this page, see what you can do. And I was able to kind of get through the problems enough that they're like, we don't really have any more material for you. So they threw me over the GT teacher. And she had me do what were called type 3 projects. Does that mean anything to you?
No.
So type 3 project is basically like, it's kind of like a business model, but it might not be around a business. So it's one of those like those boards, those cardboard, that you do at like science fairs.
Mm-hmm.
But she would give me like a project of the month, and she was like, okay, here's and sometimes it was an environmental issue. Sometimes it was, more of like a something more kid related. And I had to be kind of the CEO of this problem and solve it. And then the only math I was working on was these competitions, these math Olympiad things. So anyways, fast forward, I get to like end of 5th grade, and they go, okay, you're going to go to middle school. They have this thing called Saturday Math. It's for the smartest kids in the whole county. So we go to that, and that was like right when I was getting off track in the neighborhood. And I'm like, this is whack. Like, I don't want to be hanging out on Saturdays doing math. So I go in there, and it's like all these super smart kids. And I'm just like slacking. Like, I'll just get to this like the day before. And I got crushed. They're like, I had like a C- within 30 days. And they're like, there's no room in here for like discipline, no room in here for anything besides excellence. So I get kicked out, go back down to GT. I'm like acting out in class. Teacher bumps me back down to honors. Anyways, short story. I basically got to pre-calculus when I was 7 years old. I tested on my SATs like pretty high for a 7-year-old in math.
Wow.
And I didn't really advance much. Like all the way through college, I only got to calculus. So it took me like 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm
funny.
not an engineer.
Oh, well, it happens. It happens, I suppose. But I wonder if, boy, I don't know. That makes me wonder, because I did, similar. They brought me in all these like little think tanks and things that I would go through, and I'd sit down with all these other kids. I'm like walking by myself in the school, going to these special little classes they had me in part of, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I was so uncomfortable. I had no clue. Nobody really explained it to me. They were like, you just need to go to those classes. For all I know, it was like their version of the short bus, and not actually telling. Like, I wasn't actually like smart, right? But then, like, even in junior high, I was we moved for when I went into junior high. Right before we went into there, I moved to yet another school, which was like I don't know. So that was 7th grade. So the summer before 7th grade, we moved to this new spot, and that was probably my, I don't know, 7th, 8th school. Like, I mean, we switched schools even multiple times in the middle of the years, but I was always like, so I just would keep studying, and I would learn from all these different places I'd go. And I remember like 8th grade, I was in math, or I was in science, and I got like 105 on the test or something, but I forgot to write my name on it. And the teacher was like, this is obviously Adam, so I'm going to go talk to Adam. Like, and then all of a sudden, again, I realized what friends were. I started wrestling. I started doing all this stuff, and I was like, the heck with all this. Like, it just, I thankfully wasn't worried about my street cred. I didn't have much of that, but I often wonder what would have happened if I would have been able to continue to apply myself in those ways, if I would have known, because I was in a massive public school, and it was like, okay, I was just one of the many, and I never knew what to do with all of that. But I love that you were at a young age, to go back to what I was originally asking about, was that your dad was asking you questions about what was happening in the world, and what was happening in society, and how your brain worked. My 5-year-old the other day walked over to my wife and was like, "Mom, what does economical mean?" Because he was watching this this business show that I had him watching, and he was like, "I need to go find out what economical means, because when we have a question, we have to ask." So he goes and talks to Mom, and Mom's like, What? Like, where did you hear that? What is going on? But I want to encourage that as much as I absolutely can. So how have you applied that same thought process now? Like, do you read the news with your kids now? What is it like? Kind of exposure do you give them besides obviously sports? Because I know that's important. But
it's interesting because I found myself more frequently having to kind of like put up guardrails, pump the brakes, like remind myself they're too young for that conversation. Even if I had that conversation with my parents at a young age, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is kind of where I've become a little bit more guarded in just like, let's wait till middle school for that one or whatnot. But, again, it's parenting techniques. But I would say, to answer it directly, like, I think curiosity is something that needs to be stoked. And and it's something I do all the time. And my wife does as well. I think all of my kids have, pretty positively picked up on it. And I think, sure, we get stressed at times, and it's like they ask you a question, you're like, like, I'll answer that later. Or, why are you asking that? But like, I think that is the moments that you get as a parent to really like answer the question and go like, well, tell me a little bit more about why you were thinking about that question, and figure out how they're applying it. And I think what I've realized post-pandemic is how important these certain times of the day are for that, especially right before bed. Like if I ask my kids, like right off the bus, how was your day? My daughter will tell me all about it, every single detail in chronological order. My boys like run past me to get, whatever carbohydrates in them and like watch some TV or whatever they want to do, go play in the yard. But at night, for whatever reason, and I don't think this was before we were doing the journaling, that's where it's like, hey, can I tell you something about school? And then that leads to something. And then, hey, Dad, what does this mean? Or they were talking about this, or they'll say something that I'll say, do you know what that means? And then I'll say, you need to be careful about acting like you know what that means because you don't really understand it. And here's a framing point for you so you understand how others might perceive that. I'm not telling you not to say it or not to do it, but you need to understand how that fits into society's view of it, not to try to just be a fit in, but to make sure you understand where you might be crossing lines.
Yeah, that's interesting. So just this morning, I went and toured an acting academy. Do you know what acting academy is? Have you heard of that? So it's a type of school that is much more on the Socratic method of asking a lot of questions. They're not like sitting down with a teacher at a desk, making sure that all these things are done. But it's a lot of question asking, a lot of the entrepreneurial skills, a lot of life skills that are implemented into it. Some of them will have like full kitchens where you're learning. It's not like an artsy type of thing where hey, we all need to learn how to be cooks. But like, hey, if that's what you're interested in, then go cook today. No big deal. Like if you want to learn about how to change the oil in a car, then we can figure that out. Like let's learn together. But they have like little business ventures that the kids will create, and they'll have like little sales around Christmas time. Like, hey, this is the business I created. This is the product I created. Here's my pitch for you to buy it. And like these kids are learning about all of these different things. And it was started by a couple entrepreneurs out in Austin, and it has grown up quite a bit since then. So in GoBundance is where I learned about it with a bunch of guys in GoBundance have their kids in these acting academies. So I was there today, and they were like, look, the most uncomfortable part about this type of school is the parents, because the parents are so used to what society has said we should be teaching our kids. And honestly, if a kid is asking the question, they're probably ready to learn it. Yeah. Like it's one of those, what do you know? Like the kid is interested. Why, and I underlined this 3 times, put a star next to it when you said that curiosity needs to be stoked. And like, I picture that purely as a fire. Like too many times curiosity in our kids is stamped out so that the fire doesn't start and doesn't get out of control, rather than let's let that spark fly. Let's keep the curiosity going and let it build into a legitimate fire. Because I think the curiosity fire can go out. It can turn into a wildfire. Don't get me wrong, and burn down a lot of acres, right? Yes, especially with internet, it can take you a lot of ways. But man, oh man, if you can like guide the curiosity to those directions, like I mean, there's no way the kid can't stop learning. Like they're just going to keep going.
So I want to kind of tap into 2 things with that. One is my mom's best friend and her husband started a school called the Harmony School in Bloomington, Indiana. And I don't know whether it fits into the Acton Academy structure, but I know that they have been, heralded with awards around the country for these free-form school concepts. And I'd been to that school as a middle schooler, as not really a prospective student. I was like friends with the principal, but she was like, hey, come to school for a day. And like, I went to the school for a day and I was like, whoa, this is way different than I think it's something like if 5 students want to learn about a topic, they just start a class.
Nice.
I was like, oh, okay, that works. But there's other things like socially, there's not as many people. So like basketball is ages, 5 to 18. So, you're not going to get maybe the same level of competition on the playground. But the other thing I was going to say about that, like kind of schooling is just I think that, we've got work to do on our schooling and our education system. And there are a lot of positives to fitting into how society forms groups and tribes and whatnot. But to your point, like at what cost? Because if it puts out all these fires, and by the time that you actually need to decide, okay, which direction, which path am I going to go on? We've been talking about that and how these decisions come up kind of quick when you're 15, 16, 17 years old. Yeah. And like, that's right when everything's extinguished. So one thing I've done with clients when they kind of seem like they're not sure what their purpose is I ask them to do a visualization exercise where I asked them to close their eyes and go back to when they were between the ages of 6 and 12. And I picked those years based on my reading on psychology and how like the self forms in those formative years. And I'm like, what did you love doing? What do you remember waking up with, like running out the door to go do? And, they always give me answers. And then sometimes those things are still hobbies for them, but rarely are they intertwined in their business. And I would encourage them to, at least if you're not doing it as part of your business, like keep it alive, because there's a reason why you were attracted to that, I think, at that age. And, just because you weren't a kid anymore doesn't mean you shouldn't be acting like a kid anymore in those environments that like felt so pure.
Yeah. I love that question. First off, I think that's a lot of fun because you had me start to think about what it was I love to do. And it was like light fires in the woods and build things, right? Like that's what I was doing from 6 to 12. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I was never home. My parents they didn't have a clue where I was. There was no such thing, obviously, as a cell phone. But I loved it. But you said like when they're getting to like 15, 16, 17 is kind of when things are starting to get stamped out. And I would like to challenge that a little bit and say I would bet in first grade, because you mentioned it in your story in first grade where you asked the question about who was going to rebuild those houses, and the teacher was like, let's put that on the shelf and talk about it later. Like to me, that's almost already starting that stamping it out, because teachers, they're not equipped to be able to answer that most of the time. Let me rephrase that. They're very equipped. It's never been a part of the process for them to know how to use that tool of, okay, let me stoke this curiosity. Okay, that's a great question. Let's figure out how to answer that. Right. Because you can go down a massive rabbit hole even for a bunch of first graders. No big deal. Like they can learn a lot just from answering that single question. But it's too many like, oh, well, we've got things on our book thing that we have to do today that the curriculum does not.
It doesn't fit into the Maryland State assessment curriculum.
Exactly. I don't know if you know this. You do those.
You trip over it and you end up, touching some live wire related to the fact that there's a war zone that just opened up yesterday, and half these kids don't even know what a war is, and we're now talking about rebuilding in that, and there's a lot of politics baked into that, and everybody's parents a contractor because we live in the first district here around DC. Like let's just table that.
Let's just table that one. And to me, like that's one of the reasons I started homeschooling, is because I want to be able to answer all those questions. My kids have a lot of them. It drives my sister-in-law absolutely bonkers. Like she doesn't like to answer that many questions. She's much more of the, okay, great, Adam, please stop asking questions. Like, and I'm like, buddy, ask as many questions as you can. My dad always told me like that's how little boys learn. And it was one of those. I hope he hears this, but it was one of those that like. I could tell it would drive him crazy though too, but it was too late in his brain. He's like, dude, I already told him that's how little boys learn. How am I supposed to manage this now? Because he'd come home from a 16-hour shift and I'd have questions, and I'd want to know things. So for me, it was around that probably 12, 13-year-old range that I really started to get a lot of that stamped down. I wasn't as inquisitive. I wasn't, interested as much anymore. And it was probably because I was getting around friends and trying to be cool, and like the guy who's always asking questions and trying to learn everything is not exactly the coolest kid in the school. You know what I mean? So
you just act like you already know. Like
duh, everybody knows that. Type 3 projects, totally know those. Totally. But for those listening that don't, if you could explain it to them like they're me, not understanding it, But what are your theories on school? Like, how do you like through what we're talking about, right? You have an encouraging style to make sure that your kids are asking questions and they're doing the things that they should be doing, and they're engaged in conversation and that type of stuff, which to me almost seems like the antithesis of what school kind of like, or the opposite of what school's really trying to do, like put them in their seats, teach them what they need to know, move them on to their next class. So how do you make sure that that's encouraged? And maybe it's a different type of school you send their kids to, but make sure that it's still encouraged both in school and at home.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this. We already agreed up front. There's no I don't know. We're making this decision as a family, right? And the pandemic was weird. We did some homeschooling. not that it was like called that. It was just the kids were home and they really weren't learning. And so,
because they were forced to be home.
the CEO Notes became Mr. Notes. Literally in the room, I was teaching. My wife would pick up some of it in the afternoon, but again, I had a company that I could flex to the evenings, flex to the mornings. She had a job, had to make sure she continued to deliver after that kind of first month or two when they were like, okay, you can be a little more flexible, but otherwise let's get our work done. So, I think if that would have, first of all, I feel blessed at the age my kids were when it happened. Because it was like, 6, 4, 2. So they couldn't really say no to me when we told them not to go to the house or whatever, right? But I don't think I was equipped to teach 3 different levels of materials. Luckily, my mother-in-law was a preschool teacher. And so she hopped in and really helped a ton. And my daughter was reading chapter books at age 4 because of that. I mean, she was pretty smart to get go, but it didn't hurt that she got one-on-one attention. My kids go to public school here in Howard County, which is a very well-resourced county in the middle of Maryland. And until maybe this year or last year, I thought public school, for sure, 100%. I went to public school. My wife went to public school. I think we learned a ton about, what it's like to be in an environment where some people have and some people don't. Some people, some people are advanced and some people aren't. And I think that's really given me a lot of my foundation to treat the world not like a privileged, jerk. But this year and the last year have been pretty challenging for my older 2 because the classrooms are overcrowded. There's a lot of different ranges of needs. And, sometimes now it's in the way things are being shaped, the advanced kids are being told, hey, you got to slow down, or you can just sit there, or you can do whatever you got to do. And my kids are patient enough, and they are, I would say, extremely disciplined as I'm trying to teach them every day to bite their lip and not be chatty and just wait for the other kids to catch up. But I keep encouraging them hey, look, it's going to split towards gifted and talented. It's going to split again in middle school. Make sure you're on the right side of that line so that all these behavioral things kind of fall to the wayside. Again, those kids need help and support too. But it has made me definitely think about alternatives. We have not explored them as a family. We have talked about them in dinner conversations. And, the older 2 are we want to go to public school. I don't think they know what an acting academy or a private school actually would look or feel like. But that's my answer. Long, but
no, good. It tells me a lot, right? So, I was a public school kid as well. My wife was private school. I was very much on the same train as you. Dude, it taught me so much, especially when joining the military. It taught me so much about life. I'd already been around all sorts of different things in life. There was no, all the parties that had the drinking, the drugs, all the stuff that was going on in high school. I was already around it. I knew what to expect. I knew what life was going to bring to me. The military didn't surprise me. It wasn't a big shock for me to get to all of that. And I was I want my kids to be able to understand what the world actually is. And then once we started having kids, I looked at my wife and I was like, never mind. Because I looked at what the world actually is. And I thought to myself, I don't really know if I want my kids to know what it is. I want my kids to be exposed to it, but I want there to be some guardrails, and to make sure that they understand at a different level, and that I'm providing the best opportunities that I can to them. So that led me to private school for sure, and I absolutely loved our private school. We lived in Northern Virginia. I loved it. It was a great school. COVID was going on right at that time too, and they, the year right after. So that was 2020 is when it all kicked off. So we had kindergarten graduation at the end of my driveway with the teacher, right? She came out because school was shut down. So kindergarten, yeah. Well, thankfully she got out of the car, had balloons, all the stuff, and it was great. And then the next year they were like, "No, we're opening up. We're able to. We're going to." So they opened everything up, and I could just see the difference in my kids from this, sitting, my kindergartner, I'm trying to teach him to not stare at a screen all day long.
Right.
And then I had to put him in front of the screen all day long to watch these videos. And I was like, I don't understand what's happening here. And And then for me to get to the homeschool side of the house, eventually it was, we had one, we were at another private school. We moved down here to Florida, and we put him into school. And there was like 3 different levels of spelling to make sure that, again, it meets all the different people that are in the group. And I was like, oh, okay, but like, and they never taught the spelling words. They just kind of were like, hey, you're in this level of spelling, spell these words. And it was like, okay, when do you teach? Where's the teaching happen? And I was so uncomfortable with it. And then we moved into a different school, and then he ended up with like 45 hours a week of school. And I was like, the kid's in 3rd grade. How are we spending 45 hours a week of school? Like, there are people that work full-time jobs less than that.
Right.
So my brain just kept going a bajillion miles an hour. I mean, I'm at this point, I'm out of the military. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm fully focused on all this stuff. I've got different ideas for where I want my kids to be and what I want to be going on.
Right.
So I completely understand like those conversations at the dinner table. My wife was still like, I don't like, what are you talking about? Homeschool? I don't understand even where your brain is at. Like today, even at the tour, she's like, she's asking questions about college and all this stuff. And it was like, look, and they even said, they're like, look, what you have to do is figure out what kind of child you want. Like when your kid grows up, what kind of adult do you want their kid to be? And then put them in the environment that's going to best get them to be that kind of adult. And I was like, well, that's a good way to really think about it, and like, and to me, at this point, and this is no judgment for anybody who does public school, especially the person that's respectful enough to get on my podcast with me, but I don't put anybody down for putting their kid in public school. It just depends on what their goals are, what they're capable of, what they're wanting to do. So I'm going to toss it back over to you after I just gave that long diatribe in response to your response to it, and tell me what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, my job, since not like job being business, but job as a parent, is that with the hours that I get during the day of quiet and freedom, because they're handed off to the state to come back on that yellow bus that still doesn't have a seatbelt. That's a problem. But like, I got to do some thought, since I'm the one that has this extra time and this creative spirit. Like, I got to do some extra time to make sure that the afternoons are structured, right? Not just sports, right? But like other things every day, something. And that if we call that the fire, right? Society, like, I got to pull them out of the fire every day and be like, hey, what did you feel in there? Tell me about it.
Yeah.
What can we learn from that? Okay. How do we get through that? How do we frame that around resiliency, adversity, and these other things that we've been talking about as values that matter? And okay, now you got to go back into it. And like making these micro goals. Like we've had these long-term subs because the teachers are overwhelmed. And so, either they happen to have a child or they happen to leave or whatever the situation is. And like my kid last year had like 5 months with a long-term sub. And I'm like, all right, I'm not expecting you to learn anything in that class. Like, let's go ahead and look at your curriculum. Let's see what you're supposed to learn. And then we're going to get on Khan Academy and we're going to have to make this up. Like, we got to do it at the same rate. So it's maybe, it's not more work than being a homeschool instructor, but it's maybe like a parallel level of effort that I would guess most folks don't have the time or not choosing to put that process in place. Not toot my own horn as if it's perfect, for sure. There's days where, I'm swamped with projects. My wife is swamped, and the kids watch, too much TV, when they get home and eat, Cheez-Its or whatever. But I think we're trying to, and bringing the grandparents in, we're blessed to have, those local to us that are coming over, and kind of even that critical 1.5 hours right after school to kind of give them a place to digest what they learned, what they didn't learn, what happened, what went wrong. But ultimately, I think the world is not going to get easier. That's my prediction, my forecast as a CFO. And there's going to be more turbulence than probably any of us can really quite imagine. And that as long as they're safe in relative, for the day, like going through some turbulence every day is probably going to train them better than I would be willing to do if I was there trying to instruct them. I couldn't create those lessons if we were homeschooling, because I wouldn't be willing to go through that much, the number of, and again, this is all post-COVID. Like, you and I are talking about these active, self-aware, entrepreneurial parents that are doing all this thought process. Most parents didn't do that, 90%. And I'm in an area where there's plenty of resources. And so what we're talking about is a bunch of kids that were on screens for 3 years straight. And like their neural linkage is, I don't know. I'm not a specialist in that environment, but I can tell you there's a lot higher percentage of kids that cannot focus. It is physically impossible for them currently to focus, and without some extra help beyond what the public schools can provide, they're not going to come back from that and fit right into this box of, public education. So, and then they're going to go get jobs, and they're going to go, or they're going to participate in society some way, shape, or form. And so knowing how to interact with that is probably an important skill to have that is a byproduct of going to public school. That's my.
Well, if you'd like, we can have a call after this sometime just to discuss how I kind of run my homeschool curriculum and what, how I look at all that. Because I also was looking at it going, okay, well, I'm working all day sitting in front of my computer. My son is working 45 hours a week. I'm working, more than that sitting at the computer. But then I still have to spend a couple hours a day with him when he comes home to go over all of this stuff. And the more research I did on homeschool stuff, I was like, not only can I probably get all of the education in, plus some, in just over the amount of time I'm already helping him with schoolwork after he gets home from school. But I'll have access to him all the time, be able to show him business stuff, be able to bring him out on business trips, be able to take him to my real estate ventures, to be able to go. And it was like, what in the heck? Why not? Let's at least give it a try for 1 year. Right now in fourth grade, I'm not losing my kid in fourth grade. I'm not ruining his life by doing it for 1 year, for fourth, maybe 2 years with fifth grade. So I was like, well, now's the time to try it. Let's see what I can do. Because your son's 10 years old, so probably
in fourth grade too. Yeah. We're peers. Yeah. And I will say, I think if that ripcord would be pulled, to me, based on what I experienced middle school, it's the time to pull it because all those outside influences that we talked about. But there's so much to be learned outside of that environment. I think there's a lot that they are learning, but there's also a lot of wasted time around other kids who aren't being trained to be extraordinarily disciplined.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I don't know. I saw a lot of extraordinarily disciplined kids tend to lose it later on too, right? So it's like, you never know. I put that word out there, but I don't mean perfection. Yeah.
I don't mean you got to get straight A's, right?
But the ability to think about what they're doing and be able to, make the right decisions and all of that means way more than perfection. So.
Right. I'll give you an example that Nathan brought home that turned into a conversation around government and politics. And you're going to be like, what is... So what sport, the one thing he will share with me every day afternoon is what'd you guys do at recess? Right. Uh-huh. And most parents are like, what'd you do at recess? Oh, okay, cool. I'm like, what'd you do at recess? He's like, I played football. Tell me about the teams. Okay, here's the teams. I'm like, oh, great. It's kid Charlie. He started his own team. Okay. How do you start his own team? How do you do that? He's like, well, you can kind of just, there's this schedule. This one kid keeps it and you got to, and I'm like, interesting. So, and then he's asking me well, what are the rules for onside kicks or whatever? So we get into this and I'm asking about the formation because this really happened in the past 2 weeks. And of course he wants to tell me about his catch and the touchdown and the whatever.
Of course.
But it turned into, accusations of cheating and then a near fight that occurred. Right. And so the kid he made the block that the other kid scored. So the kid next to him, the other team loses, his team celebrates. He's kind of leading the celebration. The kid comes up and tries to slam him. And, he did what I told him to do in that environment, which is you need to just remove yourself physically from the situation. And again, I grew up as a wrestler because my brother made me. I'm sure he knows what he could do, but I'm avoid conflict at all costs in these public environments. And sure enough, that kid went to the next kid and they got into a fight and they went to the principal's office. So that's an example of extraordinary discipline that, again, maybe our dads would have been like, you're not coming home until you win that fight, boy. But I think in this environment where, kids have weapons and people on the internet will sit and plot, I'm like, hey, just avoid the fight. Just avoid it. There's no winning any fight, really. You may have to have one day, and we'll talk about that when you're a little older. But anyways, that was an example of taking something that would have been just a comment and turning it into a discussion on self-governance. And sure enough, what ended up happening was because of that fight, they shut down football for, 2 days.
Of course, because, Right. At least it was shut down because of the fight and, not because, we're afraid somebody's going to get a skinned knee or something, because that's why. Right. Because we're afraid to have kids get hurt nowadays too. Period. End of story.
Yeah. Right.
So I completely had a question and I lost it after talking about skinned knees. I wish I remembered what it was. It'll hopefully come back to me. I don't remember. So with your business, let's talk about your current business and what you're doing, and then how you're kind of how did you get started as a fractional CFO? Where'd that come from?
It came out of the fire of a bankruptcy. Okay, so this is a good story. So started right after that real estate venture where we kind of left off. I started an energy efficiency business. Right, not much of a business plan. Had two other business partners that I kind of pulled in from the real estate ventures. One of them was Matei, the donut king. And we started this company called Renew It in 2008. And we started doing energy audits and figuring out what was wrong. We were kind of the first scientist in the home and the last one to leave the home. And everything in between was contractors, a world, you and your real estate network is very familiar with. So it was energy efficiency at scale. We got up to 50 employees, did up to $5 million a year at the peak, but it was all subsidized, some portion through the utility programs, which taught me a lot about market dynamics. And it also made it very difficult to predict cash flow. And so, I created a lot of different creative finance strategies to kind of get through this because we never really took on any funding. But eventually, there were some mistakes along the way that were made that, could not be overcome financially. So, went out of business very quickly, very efficiently. And when that happened, it's kind of it was about 7 years ago, around the last week of the year. And, down in a basement that was unfinished going like, am I really an entrepreneur? Like, that's what I've been telling myself, but only because I started so young with support. But now I've got kids. And the only thing I actually had to protect me from having to go out and get a job was the bankruptcy, because the bankruptcy took like four months, and it wouldn't be intelligent to go make money in that period of time because it would change the dynamics of the bankruptcy. So I was like, I know energy at this low level. I'm really interested at the market level. Let me go seek a mentor. So I went out and just started taking people out for coffee in my region. And I met this guy who's 15 miles down the road, kind of like this Willy Wonka character in the energy field, which energy is kind of boring, tweed coats, old stuffy rooms. And this guy was like, not that. He was that age, but he was not that energy. He was just like creative, and he needed somebody to kind of organize things for him. So I start doing that, and I get a call from a business partner I had on the prior side of the fence, and he's like, hey, would you be my CFO? I didn't realize how much I relied on you for, financial strategy and guidance. And I'm like, sure, I could be a CFO. And I'm like, I don't know what a CFO really does. So this is 7 years ago. So I start that, scale it up to as much as I can handle heading into the pandemic. I've got 12 clients, kind of everything is fractionalized, 1 or 2 meetings a month. I'm kind of their bookkeeper, controller, and a CFO light. And I'm like, I got one more slot left. And I kind of asked myself this question heading, my mom happened to be traveling in China. So I saw the pandemic coming. I'm like, something's about to change big time. Do I want to take on one more client, or do I want to try to build a system here? And I'm like, I'm going to have to turn into the teacher. So I better work on the system, not getting full capacity. So I start instigating Phil, who, we had stayed in touch as friends. Phil Matthew, for the listeners out there, we went to business school together. He went the corporate track. I went the entrepreneurial track. And I had been instigating him for a couple of years. Like, hey, dude, you should come join me. You should come join me. And, things got weird in his world around the pandemic. And he's like, you know what? Let's do it. So once he came on, that is when I think we really created this CFO as a service, because he had the experience doing multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, integrations. You've worked with him at ADPI. You know pretty well his skill set. And it kind of took my financial coaching and his actual financial corporate best practice chops, and we mushed them together and built systems around them that really help our clients to have foresight about what's coming, right? Using the historical information that needs to be taken care of by bookkeepers and accountants internally, and using that to basically tell the future and create this rolling forecast of assumptions and business insights. So I'll pause there.
No, that's intriguing. I like it. Because obviously I know what you guys do with me. How many clients do you guys have now?
We've got, all in all, we've got about 36.
Okay.
Across, the two of us and then a handful of CFOs. And then there's financial analysts that support those. So team is getting about to double digits.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So you started that, you said, about 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome. So as the growth was happening, like, how did you figure out because a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, as they're kind of building all of this stuff, they forget the systems that need to be implemented, right? And you started to think about, okay, no, I need to put a system in rather than, because it's always just drive. I need to drive more revenue. And you said to yourself, no, I need to pause and take some systems. How did you know that was the time to kind of build the systems out? I mean, you kind of implied it, but I want to dig down a little bit deeper, that this was the time to kind of build systems out. And where did you get to steal your vernacular a minute ago? Where did you get the chops to start to really know how to build these systems inside of this company?
Okay, so there was a couple things I took with me through the bankruptcy fire, and one of them was every digital document from the company before, because the bank did not want this, set of Google Docs. And so the one thing I was like, I'm going to pay for on the other side of this is the $30 a year to keep this alive. So I have everything we did. So I had a lot of templates to work off of. And we had a 50-person company on the other side. So like we had good systematic thinkers. And, my dad had taught me to be a systematic thinker. So I had a experience doing that. But I think with regards to the timing and like why now, I just had this sense that the world was going to change, that people were going to provide more grace and flexibility, and that I was probably over-delivering for my initial set of clients, including driving to their homes or businesses, that I knew that was going to stop for at least a while. And so, I had been doing these time audits quarterly to figure out where my time went, and I kind of was like, oh, look at this. I got 10 hours a week. What do I want to do with it? I had more than that I was going to be getting, but I'm like, I got to give this to the kids to teach them. I got these other 10 hours. What do I want to do with it? And I'm like, I guess I have a process in my brain / gut for like sensing that there's a big, left or right decision coming. We've talked about a couple of those through the upbringing. And I just kind of had this feeling like, okay, another one's coming. Like, wait for it. Okay. Let's go this way. Yeah. That's the answer. And so that was kind of the catalyst for it. And maybe it was partially because Phil and I are having these conversations, and I'm like, I got to get ready to show him what I'm doing, instead of just like, well, I don't know, why don't you follow me on my Zoom calls?
Yeah. Because like the systemization is unbelievably important, and like making sure that all of that's nailed down. Do you use, so like we use EOS in our company, do you use anything? I think you use some bits of EOS, but what kind of systems did you kind of build? Were they all internal? Did you find or not internal, but like all borderline like proprietary things that you just kind of built, or did you kind of like take an already built system and start to apply it into your business?
So I was given Traction, the book, ES related, right before I read that, like the last couple weeks of 2019, I think. So I was kind of thinking in that direction. I hadn't seen it framed that way. We had been doing something kind of similar, but not as efficient. And then I had always kind of learned, if you don't have a system, just put it in Excel, and the system will come from that, right? Just document it somewhere, what you're doing in some sort of order, and then you can build a system from that outline, that route. And so, now we've got, Monday.com driving everything. We've got a solution called Giraffe that drives our rolling forecast process. But each one of those ended up being an investment of both capital and a lot of time to set up and structure and customize. So in the beginning, it was really much more of, Google Docs and just kind of writing down processes and beating them up back and forth, and late nights with Phil being like, hey, I did it this way. I record your Zooms. I don't need to sit on them with you, but record them. I want to watch them because I want to see how you operate. And, and we could kind of like realize we are doing this totally different and getting kind of different results. Like I'm doing much more of a coaching psychological improvement process, and he's doing much more of a metric-based financial process. but like, what if we were to do these two things together? What would that look like? And I think that's kind of our special sauce at Sustained CFO, that it is, we're not going to be for everybody, but for the folks that join forces, like, it can kind of keep you on this sustainable path of growth towards your North Star that we've figured out from the beginning. As long as, the accountability is there and the client, client fit occurs.
Yeah. I've been loving the way that you guys have been operating it. And like, anytime I mention the word spreadsheet, Phil gets really excited and he's like, all right, yes, we're on. Like, you're talking my game here. Right. And then when you jump on the calls, having that coaching side of the house has been a lot of fun to just kind of see how you have been thinking about things in the background, that apply with where we're at, in our business and how we're kind of pushing forward. So, for me, I know it's been very appreciative. I've been very appreciative of the way that you guys have been operating, what you guys are doing. So I always look forward to, sending people over your direction and watching you guys work. So, hopefully if anybody out there is looking for a part-time CFO, or don't know that you should be looking for one, you probably should be. If you don't have a CFO, you should be looking for somebody to operate all of that stuff, because going from just looking at the bank accounts to kind of try to figure out what you're going to do next month, to actually making projections and understanding what these trends are and where the lines are and all of the stuff, makes a huge difference in how you're able to actually plan forward. I'm gonna just plug it, sustainedcfo.com. Like, go there. There's a couple bright colored buttons. They schedule a 30-minute free call with me. We'll pick you up wherever you're at and have a discussion and give you some options. And if it's not a fit, that's okay. But for a lot of folks, even if it's not a fit right now, they're like, okay, I see how this does fit in. How will you give me the foresight? And to your analogy you just made, I always say, like, if you were to get in an Uber and the driver were to stare at the rear view mirror and drive, how many miles until you would ask them to pull over because you need to get out for safety? Less than one. Yes.
Yeah. Especially for families in the car, biz dads. But like 95% of business owners that I interact with at the entry stage, and I ask them, how are you measuring? How are you managing? They say, I look at my checking account.
Yeah.
That's how they're running the business, is looking in the rearview mirror. So that's the difference, is getting that windshield clear. And then, within 3 months, we're now looking out, we've mapped the whole journey, and we're telling you what's around the corner, where the accidents are, where the detours are, and readjusting and remapping automatically, kind of in a Google Maps or Waze like mindset.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying. Ooh, I think I hear kids coming in.
Here we go.
Don't be surprised if they come busting through the door here in a minute. But they just got back from Sky Zone. They were out there jumping around like crazy, having a good old time.
Sky Zones here.
Some energy. Yeah. So Adam has been crushing this week on schoolwork.
Okay.
He's been kind of like, okay, I think I can get done before whatever time, right? And like yesterday, he got done with everything before like 11:43. I think is when he got done. He's like, it's 11:43. I'm all done, and he finished even the stuff he needed to do today. So he was like, I'm done. I don't even have to work tomorrow. And I said, nope, you're right, you don't, because I wanted to celebrate the fact that if you work hard and you go through it, now you get to go play. Like, who cares? Like, you get the day off. So he was really happy about that. I asked him, I said, do you want to do anything today? I said, the only thing you still have to do is you're always still going to have to read. So I still need you to sit down and read. Yeah. And then he just sat down and read while his brother was eating, because he eats real fast. So he just went and was like, all right, I'll sit down and read. And I was like, you don't have to read 10 pages. That's all I need you to read. But, after that, you can do whatever you want. So he was like, I don't know, on page 20 something, because he was enjoying his book. That reminds me of the thing that I wanted to mention a while back. So do you know who Jocko Willink is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's got kids' books out, and those are the books that my son's reading right now. He's on, I think, the second or third one. But he's really enjoying all of those books and kind of learning about all the stuff. So I have neglected to ask enough questions about what he's learning inside of these books. I want to get engaged in all of that. But yeah, so he just smoked through all of that and was like, all right, I'm totally excited to go to Sky Zone. So he went over to Sky Zone and had a blast. But to rewind to the comment that I was going to make before, where you're talking about your son, stepping away from the fight. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, or potential fight, I guess it was in that case, is, Jocko Willink, retired Navy SEAL, black belt in jiu-jitsu, moderately capable person, one would say, to be able to look out for himself, right? But he says all the time, he's like, look, my number one job is to avoid the fight, like get away. Like there's no need, especially when you're talking about like being on social media and all this stuff. He's like, all it takes is one thing to do, like that I do one thing, it gets recorded on something, some guy sues me, goes after all this stuff because, well, I was a big bully and all those things. It doesn't matter what the whole actual story is. It's time to go. The second a hand is laid on me, it's a different story.
Right.
But until that hand is laid on me, I'm out. Like I'm leaving. There's no, like, you don't know when that person has a knife in their pocket. You don't know when they have a gun in their pocket. It's just time to avoid the situation. And I'm going through a Dale Carnegie course right now. And that's one of the things I said, the best outcome, I forgot what exactly the rule is, but basically like the best outcome of a fight is to not have it at all. It's really an argument is what they talk about. But the best outcome for a fight in person is also to not have it. Like there's no need for the black eye if you don't need the black eye, right? So avoid it. So I love that you have already applied that into your kids' life. Because for me, I've already told my kids, I said, look, there's going to be a time where you may have to protect yourself. Like I want you to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But you have no need to, right? Especially protect yourself, protect others that are, especially those that are weaker or getting bullied. If you ever have to do that to protect somebody else, you will never be in trouble at my house. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But if I find out that you started it, if I find out that you had an opportunity to step away and you didn't, now it's a different world, right? Now we're gonna have to have a different conversation. But that was what I wanted to talk about, was Jocko's thing.
So you kind of touch on a couple of things that are interesting, and I think it involved from what we're talking about in business, but then shifting it to parenting, right? Coaching. I have been told several times in my life from different people, some that I knew really well, some that I didn't know really at all, that they're like, you're a coach. Like, you got to be a coach. And so I don't think I really took that seriously until like the last 3-4 years when Phil and I had to kind of debate this back and forth. And I was like, no, but like I do it this way. He's like, well, that's coaching. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm a coach. And he's like, well, but we say we're CFOs. I'm like, well, why can't we do both? And he's like, well, we got to nail the CFO part at least first, And I'm like, we do, but it's allowed us to think bigger and broader. And you guys have been at ADPI kind of a good example of like growing a community and courses and stuff like that. And so I think that's part of where we're heading and bringing the product down and digestible to an audience that maybe can't afford our CFO. But more, I wanted to say that I've really embraced this in the past 15 months. I've been a caddy and a coach for my oldest, but I'm also now helping, my daughter. She's a gymnast. That's her, primary thing. She also plays soccer. I signed up to be an assistant coach for her soccer team. I took on head coach for my son's basketball team. My younger son, Gavin, who is going to be 6, but they're 5. And we, ran that, like yesterday was our award ceremony. The Giraffes is the name of the team because they're tall and they keep their heads up. So I've just been having a lot of fun with this, and it's also led me to a little bit of like family history. So cool family history fact is my great uncle through marriage was Red Auerbach, who was the famous coach of the Boston Celtics. If people don't know, search best coach in NBA history. He broke the color barrier in basketball, did a lot of things, created the 3-pointer, changed the game. And I got to meet him briefly when I was a kid, didn't really recognize it, but I've known about him, kind of had an affinity towards excellence in coaching and what that can do to create great teams. And so that's something that this past year I've really dove into and taken that extra, not just I'm going to sign up to be the coach, but I'm going to do work in between, the practice and the game, in between the game and the next practice, to really think about how to build teams. And if I can do it with 5-year-olds, imagine what I can do with, sane adults. And so that's been something that's really cool. I don't know if that leads in any of the conversations we've discussed, but
no, for sure. The coaching side of the house, and it's one thing that I've said a bajillion times, and I should coin this and make this a trademark or do whatever I can do. But is as dads, I think part of our role, especially entrepreneurs, when I'm trying to talk to an entrepreneur about what it means to be a dad, right? So it's very difficult to really nail down being a CEO. There's a lot of different things that you're doing as a CEO. Some of them, it depends on what kind of company you're doing, like what kind of meetings are you supposed to be having. Are you the CEO that is always only in their office with the door shut, writing all these things down and trying to come up with all these things and hand all these things to the COO, who really kind of is the facing front for all it? Or are you the CEO that's out there all the time casting massive amounts of vision and doing it? Like, there's all sorts of different ways to do it. Just like there's all sorts of different ways to be a dad and run your family. So as a dad, my job, and I tell my boys all the time, is to make them better men than me. My job is for them to become better men than me. My job for my daughter, now that I have one of those, is to represent what it means to find a man that is better than me. So if, like, you need to find a man that is better than me. And that's my goal, because obviously, no matter what 2024 teaches us, she'll never be a man. That's just not going to happen. So it's not physically possible. But if you find a man that is better than me, then we're on the right track, right? So as we're running our businesses, our job is to make our businesses absolutely better as possible. Like, we should be looking for the most growth. We should be looking for the most ROI. We should be looking for the best systems to be able to put inside of our business to make sure that it's running well. And eventually, we may not want to be the CEO anymore. And eventually, I don't want to be the CEO of my kids anymore, right? Because I want my kids to be kind of like my own little businesses. I want to raise them to be better CEOs than me of their own life, and then where I could just kind of be on the board. And that's not going to happen without the right coaching. It's not going to happen without those right conversations. Just like it doesn't happen inside of your business without actually mentoring the people that are working for you and that are in your business and doing all these things. So I'm trying to correlate constantly, like, how my skills as an entrepreneur can apply as a dad, and how my skills as a dad can apply as an entrepreneur. And it honestly can correlate rather easily if we really just sit back and kind of take a look at it and be like, no, I need to be able to coach my kids. I need to be able to coach my employees, and not necessarily coach them like, hey, bud, let's come on over here. But no, they need to know where we need things to go in the business, because they're not necessarily thinking about the large over the top view of the entire company. Just like my kids aren't thinking about the large over the top view of what's best for the family right now, right? Their job is to be a kid, you know? Right. So, but the coaching side of it is massively important, and it's something that I've always loved being able to do, especially with my boys. And I will for sure with my daughter as well, but she's 10 months old. So there's only so much coaching I can do with her right now. She doesn't really, she talks back to me a lot, and I don't know why. And I'm guessing it's just because I haven't, gotten to her level yet. But yes, I completely agree on the coaching side of the house. I love being able to do all of that. And if we go ahead, you look like you have something to say.
Well, I think that what I found, we have boys, and he's your oldest, right? That's 10.
Yep.
Right. So we're both as exactly pretty much at the same point down that road. And I think what I found is that sport for out of some level of luck and some level of what they were pointed at a young age, all three of my kids are interested in sport, and they're willing to have conversations that they wouldn't have about other parts of life, or like business. Even like my oldest one is interested in, my daughter's interested, but the youngest doesn't want to hear about it. But if I can if I can frame things out, learning exercises, hey, we made a mistake, we have a saying here, like, who makes mistakes? Everybody. Right? Like those type of things that we can just reinforce, and like not allow a lot of these ills of society of like this false facade of perfection and, wanting everything that everybody else has and all these other things. Like, we can point this out in sport, and we can do some comparison. Like, hey, Johnny on your team has the best jump shot, so the best thing for the team is to pass him the ball if he's open, even if that means you don't get to take as many shots. Now, maybe the 5-year-old's not going to get that, but I tell you, these giraffes, you'd like to watch them on the ESPN. They understand that passing makes winning, not ball hogging. And I think that if you can teach that to 5-year-olds, I'm like, that was the goal for the season. And so, not to mention, again, distractions, lots of kids having some emotional stuff going on. Golf, you and I have talked about this before, right? There's a lot of emotions in that game. And I played it at a really high level. I mean, I competed in a USGA championship. I had the chops to go play D1. I chose to go to Maryland to go to the business school instead. But I've played in the Maryland Open. I've won the Maryland Open as a caddy. Like, I've seen near the top of the amateur game. And to be able to teach it, I find, and coach it and caddy for it, it's a privilege, but it's also a great opportunity. to reflect on it. And, I've had to learn the lessons of like, well, don't bring it up on the car ride home. Nobody wants to talk about it. Win, lose, or draw. Let it soak in and, time these conversations. But it takes, that discipline on my own end to have thought and etched out my notes, right? To find that 15-minute window right before bed and say, hey, let's talk about this, to address well, hey, you set out these goals for the year. What are we going to do to go get those? What does that look like? And then where does that fit into your calendar? Right. So now we're having these conversations. Okay, let's frame this out. Okay. And then let's mark, did we hit it or did we not? This year, Nathan shifted to wanting to practice, 3 sports at the same time. I'm like, all right, not at the exact same time, but in the same season. I'm like, let's fit this into this puzzle here. And he did it. And I'm like, okay, so where does golf fit in? And we're lucky enough to have a basement that has an ability to, practice some golf in it. It's like the only place it fit was in the morning. And there wasn't time. It was like, well, when my friends want to play, I'd rather play with them, but I'd rather make sure I practice my golf or else I don't feel good on the weekend when I go for my tournaments. Like, all right, well then here's what it is. I'm going to have to wake you up early, which means that we got to go to sleep early, which means we got to put our routine in place even earlier to be prepared for that. So these are how I find, the kind of coaching fits into parenting, fits into, teaching the kids, to tell themselves their own story about what success looks like. And there's no like, you have to be a professional at any of this, or you're going to go get a D1 scholarship. Like there's no pressure from me that I hope is reflected upon them to make them feel like that's the reason for this. It's just, hey, this is a medium, a vehicle for us to talk about these things and build this stuff out. And if you decide, next week you don't want to play golf anymore, that's fine. You have a skill that you're going to be pretty good at for the rest of your life, which, is nice, but I'm hoping you can apply these lessons and these systems to the other aspects of life. So what do you got on that topic?
Dude, I have a lot. You and I have had separate calls just about golfing with the kids. So, and, because I've struggled a lot on the, I haven't had the lovely skill set that you have of already having been a caddy on multiple different levels and playing all of those things. And I was like, man, I need to steal as many of those ideas as I can. So that said, I'm going to ask you multiple questions on all of that front. Golf in particular is one of those that my son really likes. Just the other day, we were sitting down, we had another one of those Under Armour emails. We're getting ready to start that season back up again and get him into the Under Armour tournaments. And it was like, okay, bud, like, you haven't touched your golf clubs in a little while. Like, what do you like? Do you want to go and chase medals and do everything you can to win these medals, or do you just want to enjoy the sport? I don't care one way or another. If you just want to enjoy the sport, that's fine. Let's go out and enjoy the sport and have a good time. But that means you can't be all that angry on the course when you don't win first place. Like you can't have both. And he's like, no, Daddy, I really want to win medals. I'm like, all right, well then we got to change some stuff, So as you were applying the juxtaposition of life lessons and golf lessons, how are you kind of setting the stage for those conversations, both on the course, and you already mentioned, like, not right after you get off the course, but later on? How are you setting the stage on the course to implement those life lessons? How are you setting the stage in the practice time for those true life lessons, not just staying so focused on the sport, which is something I tend to do, and forget that there's a reason why he's in sports, not just to play golf?
Okay, so this thinking has evolved. I also did some first tee teaching for the last 15 years. So I got to kind of experiment with this before it was my kids and before there was much on the line. And then, Nathan's been playing competitively for going on, this will be like his 6th season. So he's been doing it since he was 5. And I had a lot to learn. But what I figured out is that there are at least 3 different characters that you have to play early in the game of golf unless you hire somebody else to do it. You're going to be their parent, number 1, and no one else can do that, and make sure you make that the top priority. Number 2 is golf is not really a sport where they can go out and just do it themselves. I mean, they can go and hit the ball at the driving range and who cares, but you can't go play, especially in the environment that you and I have seen where it gets really competitive, really young, without a caddy. So you got to be a caddy. If you don't really know how to be a caddy, you need to do some research on that, because the tendency is to try to be a coach when you need to be a caddy. And golf is not a sport where the coach is there in your ear. Matter of fact, it will do the exact opposite of what you're hoping for, if you do that. And most parents, as you've probably seen out there, try to be coaches. So we'll have to have a longer conversation on that, hopefully when I'm down there playing some golf with you guys.
Yeah, let's do it.
Then if you choose, like, they're going to need a coach to get better if that's what they want in this sport.
Mm-hmm.
And I took on that role because I think I was skilled enough to do it.
Yeah.
And that was probably the most challenging one. And I have since given that responsibility during the winter season to a local PGA professional who's got a whole indoor academy thing. And it's great because I kind of stop in that mode. And then we've got some other ones, right? There's kind of this psychologist, depending on how your kid, and again, I don't have a degree in this stuff, but like golf is a in your head game.
Oh, yeah.
And we've had a lot of conversations about, hey, I tripped and fell through all this myself. I didn't have a coach. I didn't have a caddy. Me and this other kid just beat the earth, for thousands of hours during this critical period of my life. And that's how I got good. But now that I recognize it, I've become a much better golfer because of having to teach him how to do it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some systems out there, Decade Golf, if somebody's interested in listening, that teaches older people how to do this. But then how do you boil it down for the youth? And I think, something that my business partner, Bert, says, he used to be a soccer coach. He said, you can only tell kids 3 things, like the number 3, like don't tell them more than 3 things at a time. Mm-hmm. And so that's a good reminder to me. Like anytime we're working on anything, it's like 3 things. And, one of them might be, hey, this is what I noticed that we need to undo. And then here's the foundation of what we need to change to then put you in position. And then this is what we're reaching for. And so that might be the whole thing we work on for a week. But I have gotten him to agree that based on his goals, like here is the week of exercises that we're going to do. And it starts with, how many days a week do you think we should be doing something to accomplish the goal that you have, which is to come in top 20 in the world tournament, which we never,
nice.
He qualified for it a couple times, but with COVID, we didn't go. So whatever. He's never actually made it there, but I'm like, do you want to just show up or do you want to show up and be where the fish bite? That's what we call it, right? Because golf's not a sport. Even if you're really good, you don't dominate and win every time. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. There's a lot of percentage luck, kind of whatever chance in play. So that's how we kind of go through this. And we've got 3 off seasons that are a month long where I don't do any coaching, caddying, anything. Like if he signs up for the other coach in the wintertime, he can go to it. I drop him off, hang out with the other dads, but I'm not in there talking to him about it, just to create some breathing room. And on the back end of those, when that off season occurs, it's like, okay, now reminder, this is what you said last season, what you wanted to accomplish. Is this still what you want? It has to be reinforced to make sure that it's coming from the right place. Cause I'm like, it can't be for me. It has to be for you. And then, weekly, like what that ends up looking like, I guess just to kind of break it down is like, 1 9-hole round. Usually, 1 indoor 9-hole kind of session, 1 short game kind of wedge work session, 1 putting specific, and then 1 that's more about like physical performance. So he's working on speed training, trying to get, he recognizes that his weakness is he doesn't hit as far as the best kids. And that would shift from him hitting, woods and long irons into hitting wedges in, which he understands because we've done all this tracking of this data. It's like, okay, I just need to get closer to the hole so that my dispersion is tighter. And then I'll have, birdie putts instead of, birdie chips.
Mm-hmm.
But
I love that. Yeah.
Last thing I want to say, and I want you to jump in on this, is like his goal this year is to caddy for himself in a tournament. Because by the time you turn 12 around here, your parents aren't allowed to caddy anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm not waiting until that. I said, hey, 10, you're going to start caddying for yourself. 11, the goal is to win while caddying for yourself. And then 12, training wheels are off. I'm just a spectator. We can talk about it after the round. And there's certain events I can caddy in, but many of them I can't. So that's what we're preparing for now, is actually a year and a half from now.
That's awesome. Yeah. I've never gotten to that level of granularity on the, I want to set goals or I want him to set goals with me, is what I should say. Not me set goals with him, but him actually set the goals with me. Sit down, go over the goals. What is it that you actually want to do? We tend to talk about it like before the round, especially when he was really in a funk in his brain. It was like, okay, well, let's just say how many really good shots do you want to have this round? Just tell me how many really good shots for you to be able to walk away and say, hey, I did well. Because we were in a bad spell. Like, he was just not playing very well. And it was like, let's just focus on getting a few good shots to feel confident about what we did. But it was always, to me, I almost felt like I was just kind of tacking it on to make sure he understood while we were there. Like, I was trying to do something to help engage the brain. But sitting down and actually having the goals and saying, okay, well, if we want, you want to win more first place medals, this is what we need to do. Because we've taken off, even going to any of the Under Armour ones. I forget if do you do any of the Under Armour ones up there, or mostly
we
just
did it? I know the system and how it rolls up to the regional and the national. And
yeah, so I was trying to. We'd done the national one, the national tournament. And it was very new for him. And he, again, we never had goals to it. We were just like, hey, this is our first one. I don't know what to think about it. Let's just go test it out and see what it is. But I want to set some of these goals. I've started teaching him about SMART goals and what we need to do, all of this. And I think I've held him back by not challenging him enough and putting it on him to have the thing. I think he's just relying on me. So I love the sitting down and having those goals and going over a plan and how we're going to be able to get there, because he's got enough self-drive to be able to go do it. It just, I think he just needs the plan to be able to build it out.
So I got a book for you. I'm not the author, and I bought this book several times for him and now my daughter. It's called Mental Toughness for Teenage Athletes. And there's nothing teenage about it. I mean, some of the words are a little big, but it kind of walks them through not only everything we're talking about, but a lot of the mental stuff and a lot of the processing, understanding value versus, the values that you have versus comparing yourself to others. And golf is one of those, where it's like the leaderboard is permanent. It sits there. And if you're down at the bottom, like I felt it. I've come in dead last in a, the United States Open qualifier and been like, dang, like I suck, or at least today I did.
Yeah.
But, personally, how that works for me and my brain is it takes me about one day, and the next day my brain's like, all right, I suck. Let me break that round down. Here are all the places where it was weak. Here's how I'm going to change my practice regimen, and I'm going to go back out there and sign up for the next one. That's how my brain works, but that's not probably how a 10-year-old brain works.
Yeah.
Right. They probably sulk in it a lot longer. Yeah. They feel beaten down.
A lot more emotion, a lot less logic. Yeah.
So I think if you're going through this exercise with your son, I would encourage you to stretch those goals out so that there's time, right? Because ultimately that's what we're trying to really help them do is like have delayed gratification by putting in work. And then, the other thing is I would maybe counter what you're doing prior to the round, because for me, how I experience golf, a lot of the outcome depends on kind of how I roll into the parking lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know how far you got to drive for these things. We got to drive kind of a while. We're going Northern Virginia for some of them. So we pull out of the drive, we're pulling out of the driveway, and I'm like, hey, bud, let's remind ourselves, what's the number one goal? And he's like, have fun. Yep. Okay. Number two is I want to set your expectations for what it's going to be like when we get there. Okay. So we're going to get there. We're going to do chipping, putting, driving range. We'll have about this much time for it. I want, to make sure that whatever we're working on, make sure you're thinking about these are the keys to your chipping. And it's in his head, right? It's strengthen your grip, weaken this, put on your back foot, whatever it is, right? And it's not like I'm driving the car, so I'm not showing him any of this. I'm just reminding him what we worked on for the week. And I'm like, do you have any questions? No. And I'm like, okay, put on a 7-minute meditation. Okay. And I still have to probe him to okay, I want to hear some deep belly breaths back there if you don't mind, bud. And then he forgets, right? And he's eating his Cheetos or whatever, right? And then it's like, all right, bud, one more. Okay, that's over. All right, what do you want to listen to? Red Hot Chili Peppers, great. And we just rock out on the highway, right? And I let him just kind of stay quiet.
Yeah.
And then, all right, hey, we're about 10 minutes out. I'm going to put on another 7-minute meditation. Put one on, roll in. And again, what's our number one goal? Have fun. How do we do that? By, remaining calm and being kind to myself. It's like, great. I'll get everything set up. Go hit that putting green. Now, again, we've gone through this for years and a lot of trial and error in that, but that is working pretty well to kind of get him out into a chilled out state instead of coming in all fired up, goal oriented. Now, what we do maybe midweek is if we haven't played the course, I'll print up this caddy book, and it's not even that important. because, their T's are so close. It's like, you're going to hit driver and then you're going to hit whatever you have. But it just helps him feel like he's mapped it out. And again, being military, I'm sure this is when you're on a mission, like you want all the data you can get in advance. So I'll be like, okay, looks like there's a creek running here on number 4. It may not be a driver. Let's just make sure, if you get to the tee first, wait for me before we even pull a club. Okay, got it. So I'm really trying to teach him how to caddy for himself now. Mm-hmm. Like that's my goal more than being his caddy. But again, I had this kind of 5 years as a professional caddy, like experienced it. So that's what I'm working off of.
Dude, I freaking love it. I'm going to have a lot of takeaways. I mean, I think I took 2 pages of notes just on the golf stuff we just been talking about. But I can't wait to get him back out on the course again. My wife and I, after last year's season, because he was just all inside of his head, and I didn't know how to get him out of it. Like it was, I didn't have the skill set to help him do it. So we had almost even thought about, let's just let him have fun for a season, like just nothing but fun for a season, whether it's no golf at all or whether it's we just go become a member at some course and just let him go play around with me and just have golf with dad and not be worried about the competition, not be in his brain, not doing all those things. But
so I want to give you another nugget there on like what I figured out. And again, I'm not suggesting your kid is 2 years this or whatever, but like Nathan was having the same problem, really intense, to the same thought, and like this was breaking my heart because I'm like, maybe you need to pull the plug on this, or like something. It was like he was going into 8 years old, and I'm like, it was happening when we were just going out to play these 9 holes, and it was because I'm like, okay, bud, like we're gonna get to the course. I'm gonna give you this many strokes, right? And I was making it a competition between us. So then I'm like, hey, I got an idea. I'm like, dad goes out and competes. I compete a lot of times in 4-ball formats, which is we're on the same team, but we also play our own individual balls. So you're still having the stroke play experience. You need to putt everything out. Yeah. But the 4-ball is the format where it's kind of, you count whichever one's best. So it's like, it's this team effort. That totally changed the paradigm. So now all of our practice is a 4-ball where it's like, hey, we're team, Notes or team LeBar. Like we're going to go out there and we're going to compete together on the same team. And hey, what does it take to be a good teammate? Well, you got to have a good attitude. Like if you're dropping your head and I'm kind of still caddying for you, bud, like that's pulling me off my game, and I can't make my, my birdie putts if I'm thinking about you crying over here because, you hit it to 30 feet when you expected 20, which was unrealistic anyways, but we'll get to that next week. It's like, so that really changed a lot of how we practiced. And then the other thing we figured out was, we took a psychological evaluation that was provided by some folks at US Kids of both of us, and we lined up the profiles, and it showed us what happens when we get stressed out together. Like, how do our profiles of psychology map together? And what we basically figured out is I need to shut up, and he needs to have some space. And so we've come up with some like some key words where what basically he says, Dad, I got it. And that means shut up. I'm going to walk ahead. And on the course, and then he's got to kind of invite me back in to be his caddy. And sometimes like he's made bad decisions because he didn't bring me back in as his caddy. But I think that's okay. That's part of this process. And if we're doing this 15, 20 times a year, there's a lot of kind of like things that we learn from that. And then some days it just goes really well where he doesn't have to fire me at all. But again, he's firing me for a hole, not saying like, I don't need you, and running off and trying to escape. And so I think that's where we're at today. I'll let you know. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some tears this year on the course as well, but I think it's also very normal. I didn't get into the game until I was a little bit older, but what I see and hear from all the other parents I talk to is like, everybody's going through it. Maybe some kids don't do it in front of other people. Maybe some only do it at home on the home course. Maybe some don't emote at all, but they bottle it up and they feel terrible, and the parents can sense that. So I think, it's not for the faint of heart, right?
Yeah, no kidding. But well, we are really close to our time here, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. But Josh, it was absolutely awesome to be able to chat with you, get to know you on a much deeper and different level than sitting there doing CFO work and coaching work on the other side. So thank you so very much for jumping on. You already talked about the website and everything, but go ahead and reiterate again how somebody could reach out to you if they wanted to get a hold of you. What's the best way to reach out to you or follow you or anything like that on social media?
Perfect. So Josh Notes on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only one, but come find me there, or go to sustaincfo.com and look for the bright button that schedules a call, and we can meet on the other side of a Zoom.
Awesome. Well, as everybody, as you've heard, I already use Josh and his services, and I greatly appreciate having the skill set that he and his team have. So reach out to him for sure if you have anything on that front. But thank you all for listening. Thank you for jumping on, Josh. I greatly appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, all those things. Listen to these as I don't know, maybe 100 times each if you guys all can, so we can get our listenership up. Also, comment below any tips or comments you have on any of the sports stuff that we talked about, any of the business stuff we talked about. But thank you all very much. And thank you again, Josh, for jumping on. And we will see you everybody on the next one.
All right. Thank you.